So we're going to resume with our lesson. What we want to look at, unfortunately, this is a lot simpler than working with a recycler view. We're going to try and implement authentication through Firebase, and we can do this in a couple ways. Firebase has a lot of providers. We're going to look at doing both username and password as well as Google sign-in today. So we're going to use a library for this that writes a lot of the code for us. So the code is pretty light, which is great, but we should have a look at the process of what this looks like. So Firestore has a number of options. So it's got email password, it's got phone, it's got Google. So we're going to enable both email password as well as Google authentication, but you have other options as well. There's other hooks that are already here if you want. So I've put links, these slides are on Blackboard for you, but I've put some links to the documentation. One of the things that's kind of new is Firebase has a bill of materials. So what this means is it makes sure that a lot of our Firebase libraries are compatible, and we no longer have to necessarily specify the version of each Firebase dependency. We can just specify the version of the BOM. So we're going to use that. As well as I've given you links to their quick start code on GitHub, as well as sort of the tutorial for what it looks like. And the code we're going to follow is basically based on this tutorial. So you may want to open up this link. I will put it in the chat for you because we can grab some of the code that's here in a little bit. First, we're just going to kind of give you an overview and show you what it's going to look like. So we're going to need 3 dependencies. We're going to need the Firebase UI auth. So one of the cool things that comes with this is we don't actually have to design our own register and login activities. The Firebase UI auth library, it already will generate the UI at runtime if we include the dependency. And it also can handle both register and login on a single activity, which is nice. So we're going to implement that. We're going to include the BOM, which is currently at version 2600. And then if we include this Firebase auth library, if the BOM's included, we don't actually need the version number anymore. So if this version updates, we can just update the BOM and it'll update any related dependencies, which is kind of neat. So our code, and this is really straight out of the tutorial link that I just posted. So to register a user, it's going to look something like this. The Firebase auth library has a method called create user with email and password. It makes an asynchronous call to Firebase, basically using a task asynchronously. It evaluates if it's successful. And then it allows us to store. We can always access the current user with the current user property. And then we know who is this person using the app right now. In Firestore, if we're signing in with username and password, we'll be able to see, you won't be able to see the password, we'll be able to see the email address and the auto-generated user ID, as well as it tells it Firestore automatically keeps track of logins. So it'll tell us when was a user account created and when did they last sign in. The tutorial also gives us sign-in code. It looks pretty similar. Instead of calling create user with email and password, we'll call sign in with email and password. Again, it runs an asynchronous task, and it will either return us a current user object or tell us the login has failed. In any activity, if we want to check who the current user is, we can just instantiate an instance of our Firebase connection with get instance, and then we make our call to current user. So for example, maybe we want to check if current user is null, we want to redirect back to the sign-in activity. To sign out, it's as simple as Firebase auth.getInstance.signout. This is what our UI is going to look like. It's going to give us a sign in with email and sign in with Google. Now there is a gotcha here. We're going to implement the code from the tutorial, and our sign in with email, it should work pretty much right away. All we really have to do is lift the code from our tutorial, add the dependencies. we're good to go. So I'm hoping this won't take us all that long. The Google sign-in, however, there is a problem with, and that is this dreaded code 10 error. What the tutorial neglects to tell us is we're going to get this error when we set up Google sign-in. And there's a fix for it, but the fix is not mentioned in the tutorial. They've omitted this step in the documents. So the issue is our Firebase app, in order to allow Google sign-in, it needs a SHA fingerprint from our Android app. Now, we can actually get this fingerprint inside Android Studio. It's in the settings, and then we have to go and add it. Sorry, from Android Studio, we've got to add it in. Yep, absolutely. You can use this. And this code you can pretty much use directly from our Restorator. You can use it as is in your app. I don't expect you don't have to customize it at all. It's not plagiarism. It's fine if you just follow the same code we've done here. No problem. Okay. So there's a link to a Stack Overflow article with some other fixes for this message. But the easiest way is by grabbing our SHA fingerprint from the Gradle info in Android Studio and adding it into the Firebase settings of our project. So we're going to do that. Okay, so I've shown you where you go. We'll go into the Gradle section, and down here there's a signing report that gives us a SHA certificate fingerprint for our app. And then we go into our project settings in Firebase. We click Add Fingerprint, and we paste in that fingerprint. That should make that code 10 error that is not very descriptive. It should make it go away. So what does this all look like? I will show you. So here's my test app that I've been playing around with. And I really appreciate the suggestion that somebody made in the survey a few weeks ago saying, before we write new code, it would be great if you could show us, demo it and show us what does the end product look like. So we have a vision in mind. So I will try to do that for each class. So I'm going to load my test project in my emulator, and we can see what do these sign-in options look like. So I'm going to sign in with email. So here's the UI we get. We can add other things to it. So I've created an account already. Actually, you know what? I'll create an account that doesn't exist. abc@abc.com. So I haven't had to build any of this UI. Firebase does it for me. I'll add a password. And I'm actually signed into the site. I added logout buttons. I moved our floating action buttons from the right to the left. And now I've signed out. If we go and look at my Firebase console, I'll just pull up my other project. So here's my test project. If I go into Authentication, I have enabled already in here, and we'll have to do this. I've enabled both email and password and Google. All the services, all the providers are disabled by default. So you have to manually enable whichever services you want, which we will do. And I just created this abc@abc.com user today, but I've also enabled Google so I can sign in with my Google account as well. Okay, so this is what we want to implement. And then once we get this working, it's not very difficult because most of the code we're going to take directly from the tutorial. So hopefully I can get you off to your reading week well in advance of 2 o'clock today, I would certainly hope. So our first step is in Firestore. And again, this is why you need to be connected to your own project and not to mine. Because if you're connected to mine, you're not going to be able to go through these steps. So I'm going to go into my Restorator Firebase project. I'm going to click on Settings beside Project Overview. Actually, I'm sorry. I'm going to click on Authentication, which takes me here. There are no users in our list. So I'm going to set up the sign-in methods. And I'm going to enable, I'm not going to enable passwordless sign-in for now. Just going to do email password. And their SDK provides email address verification, password recovery, etc. So I'll save that. So do this with me in your console. And we also want to enable Google Authentication. And it tells us to set this up, we'll need to add the SHA-1 fingerprint for each app. So this, if we don't do this, this is where we get that code 10 error. So I'll leave this out for now so you can see the error. We'll add the SHA fingerprint after, which should fix this. So I'm going to enable, and you do have to pick the email address associated with your Google account here. So enable Google. Make sure you pick your email associated with your Google account, and then you can click Save. Okay, so I've got email password enabled, and I've got Google enabled. So make sure you do these two things in your Restorator. And again, if your project is still connected to my database because you took my Git repository, make sure that you go into your project settings and download your Google Services JSON file and overwrite the file that came with my project. Then your app should be connected to your own database rather than to mine. It's important you connect to your own database because you'll need to go through these configuration steps. Okay, so we've set up sign in. I've got two sign-in methods. Oops, I didn't hit save. I got two sign-in methods enabled, but I have no users. So you can even set up templates. See, we'd need an SMTP server to send emails, so I'm not going to enable this right now. But you could set up like your confirmation email, SMS verification, for example. I'll leave that out for now. Okay, any questions so far? Okay, good. So our next steps, we've set up the providers, we've configured our providers. Let's go to this link, this auto-generate sign-in UI. I put it in the chat, but I'll put it in here again for you. If you are doing this lesson later at home, this slide deck is on Blackboard, and this is your fourth slide. We want to go to this auto-generate sign-in link. So I'm going to go here. So we want to easily add sign-in to our Android app with Firebase UI. Right? So it will give us, depending on what options we configure, and I'm just going to stick with Google and email, it'll give us a sign-in screen that looks like this. But it also tells us the dependencies we need. Now, this includes Facebook for Android and Twitter for Android. I'm not going to use those, so I don't really need that. So the first thing we do need, though, is we need the Firebase UI Auth dependency. So that will help build this screen. So just copy this first line. com.firebase UI, Firebase UI Auth 620. So copy that in the before you begin section. And we want to add this to our app level build.gradle file. So I'll go to my project. and my restorator app build.gradle. I'm going to open that. So in my list of dependencies, I'm going to add Firebase UI Auth 6.2.0. Android Studio wants me to do a sync, which I'll do. Apparently, a number of these dependencies have been updated. I'll leave them for now. You could update them to the latest versions if you like. So I'm going to sync my project. I'm not going to worry about the Facebook or Twitter keys. We also need those two other dependencies. It doesn't mention it on this page, but I've got them in my slide deck. I'll put them in the chat. So we've added Firebase UI Auth. We also need the build of materials and the Firebase Authentication library. So these are here in the chat. I need these as well. So we're implementing the BOM platform. And I've got to sync again now that we've added these dependencies. So the links to read more about the build of materials, they're in, well, actually, I guess we can have a quick look at it. It's in the PowerPoint slide deck on Blackboard. So let's just see what is this build of materials? What is this BOM? This is a new thing. Let's have a quick look at what's there. We're using the dependency. We should probably figure out, at least know what it is. So it lets us manage all the Firebase libraries, but instead of having to specify the version for each one, we just specify the build of material version, and it automatically pulls in the individual library versions and makes sure they are compatible. So if we update the BOM version, it updates all of the related Firebase libraries to the compatible version. We did still need the version for Firebase UI Auth because it's not part of the base Firebase library. It's part of Firebase UI instead. So for example, this one, we probably wouldn't need the version anymore because it would be covered by the build of materials because it's under com.google.firebase. Okay, so there are dependencies. Now I want to set up a new activity. I'm going to call it sign in activity, and we want to set it as the launcher activity. So this is going to overwrite, it's going to modify our Android manifest.xml. Right now, when we start the app, our app starts with our list activity. We want it so that the sign in activity loads first. So I'm going to go to my file menu and I'm going to make a new activity, which will be an empty activity. I'll call it sign in activity. And this time I'm going to check the launcher activity checkbox. So this will modify the intent filter in Android manifest.xml. It'll take it out of the list activity and it will add it to sign-in activity. So when our app starts, this will be what runs. So just call it sign-in activity. Make sure you check the launcher activity file. Pretty simple. And click finish. So we've got an empty activity. We don't need to put any views in the XML file. We're going to use the Firebase code to generate the UI automatically. We're going to use the Firebase UI Auth to generate the UI for us dynamically. So if we go and look at Android Manifest now we've got it on both actually. We've got two. So I'm going to remove the intent filter from my list activity. We can't have two launcher activities, or we don't want two launcher activities. So I'm going to remove it from list. So when my app loads now, we should just get a blank screen. I'll run it now. So I should just see Restorator at the top and an empty activity below. So here's our app right now. My blank sign-in activity is loading. Okay, so we've added the dependencies to build.gradle. These three. And we've enabled email and password as well as Google sign-in in the Firebase console. So now we can use the code that's here in our Firebase UI sign in with the pre-built UI. So we've got a little bit of code here we want. So if we scroll down to the middle section, there's a section here that says sign in. And again, I put the links are in the chat. And it's also in the PowerPoint slide. This is firebase.google.com, Docs, Auth, Android, Firebase UI. This is where you can get this code. So I'm going to copy this block of code, but I'm going to take some of it out because this includes 5 different sign-in methods: email, phone, Google, Facebook, Twitter. I want to remove phone, Facebook, and Twitter. But I'll copy this block of code in the sign-in section. I'll open up my sign-in activity. I'll paste it in. So this will be Firebase UI sign-in code from, and I'll just add the link here. And make sure you're copying the Kotlin version. So there's tabs here. Here's Java. It's almost the same. Here's Kotlin. Make sure you grab the Kotlin code. And we need a couple things. We need the Auth UI import. We've also got a constant here, RC sign-in, which I'm going to define at the class level. So let's run our activity now and see how this looks. So I've just declared my variable, copied this code direct from the tutorial. Whoops. So it's going to grab my list of providers and then instantiate our Auth UI and set the providers. Sure. Yeah, I will show RC sign in just a second. So I'll run the app now. Okay. I think the issue may be here. We can't call Facebook and Twitter. I think it's going to check for those keys. I'll check my log to see why. Or I can't call the phone right without the permission. So I'll just take those things out now. We're not allowing phone, Facebook, or Twitter authentication. So let's just disable them right now. So I'm going to take out my phone as well as Twitter and Facebook. So I'm cutting my providers down to just email and Google. I will come back to the question around the constant for RC sign in a moment. Yeah, Edwin is mentioning in order to have the phone, he had to grant permission. I'm not going to allow phone sign in, so I'm just going to remove it. So now we get two buttons from our Firebase, our Auth UI component, an email login and a Google login. Okay, they're not functional yet, but the UI at least is generated. Okay, so let's look at what's happening here. So we've got this request code. So our start activity for result method, it calls an intent. And there's a request code attached with it. So we've defined our request code. Okay, it doesn't like that name, but we followed. This is bizarre. It's all from Google. This is their own documentation that calls it RC sign in, and yet Android Studio says it doesn't like the naming conventions. So what does this mean? Well, let's have a look. Fortunately, if we look on this, it doesn't actually tell us. And in their sample, they also never actually declared it. We need that constant because it's in their code, but they never declare it. So we need to look at this start activity for result method. So let's look in the docs about what that says. So if we look at the developer documentation from Android, when we start an activity, it doesn't have to be a one-way operation. We can get a result back. So what this is doing, this parameter, is getting a result back. We're kicking off a request for a result. So what the Firebase docs don't actually tell us is, let's try it. I believe that 123 code, oh, here's our activity result. When our sign in, we get back the result in this activity on result. So it's basically the request code that comes back from Firebase when we try to generate the UI. Of course, it never actually defines that constant. I'm curious if we change that constant, what will happen? Oh, they do? Did I? Oh, in the Kotlin file here, but probably not in the activity. Okay, let's go here. So in the GitHub repository, yes, it is defined here. It's also weird they've used const and val, but they never explain what 123 actually means. So yeah, I don't think it's a great tutorial that you have to go to source code to find all the code. I don't know is the short answer to the companion object, to be honest with you. So what happens if we change this? Let's say we change the code to 1234. Does this actually affect anything? So we still get the same UI even without that. So they haven't done a great job of defining what that value, that constant value means. We will see this again. Expected member declaration. Make sure that you're inside of onCreate. And make sure you have the dependencies in build.gradle. So either your code, maybe your code is not inside the onCreate method, or maybe you're missing one of the dependencies in build.gradle. Which was it? Was outside the onCreate method or a dependency? Got it. Okay. So now we can go back to our tutorial. We've set up sign-in methods. Oops. So this displays the UI. Okay, thanks, Edwin. I'll have a look at that after. So we've got this code here in this section that we can add. We can override the onActivity result. And it also uses this RC sign-in. It's checking the request code. So this is going to tell us whether the login or the registration was successful. So we're going to copy this. And this will go outside onCreate. So this is a separate function. We're overriding onActivity results. So we'll copy that code and then we'll paste it in and we'll make a few changes. So after onCreate, we'll need to import our intent class and the IDP response class, as well as activity and Firebase Auth. So we're going to import everywhere to get rid of those 4 errors. So if a user is successfully signed in, we're going to store them. We're calling get instance current user. What should we do if a user signs in successfully? What should they do inside our app after they've registered or signed in? Yeah. So we can create an intent. So let's take them to the list activity. If sign in failed, we could just send a toast message. Actually, maybe we'll use the snack bar. We'll import. I haven't used the snack bar for a bit. Just go and check my docs. I can use a toast if this takes too long, but we'll do a snack bar. Snack bar. We'll try it this way. Okay, I'll just use a toast. I'm rusty with my snack bar. So now we should be able to try to register. Let's see what happens. So here's our activity result method. We'll give it a try. So I'm going to try to sign in with email. So I'll click sign in with email. So it asks first for my email. I'll just put in as test@test.com. Now it doesn't recognize this email in the database. So it lets me sign up. So I'm going to create an account. And Firebase signs me in, takes me to the list activity. How do I know it actually registered me? Well, If I go back and check in my Firebase console, I now have a user account. You can see I'm logged in with my email provider. Now I should probably also add a log out feature, because right now I'm going to be signed in. Unless I really close the device, I've got no way to log out. So we'll also want to add a quick logout button to our list activity. I could put it on all the activities, but for today, I'll just put it on the list activity. And then we'll write a logout handler that will sign me out of Firebase and take me back to the sign in activity. Okay, so here's all the code. Again, it's also in the chat. It's 5-1, so I think we should take a little break. I don't think we'll need the whole time left to add logout in Google, because a lot of the code's already here. But rather than make you work for like 75 minutes without stopping, I think I'm going to pause the recording here and we'll take a short break. I will push this stuff up to GitHub and we'll come back in 10 minutes and finish this off. Are there any questions just before we take a short break? Okay, I've pushed the code. And we'll